Booster shots would have been for everyone, again, 16 or older. But keep in mind this, the FDA meeting was still going on, and we're going to keep an eye on this for any more information that comes out of that meeting. But until then, joining us to just try to get a better understanding of all this, because there's always a lot of information and moving parts in this, is Dr. Shereef Elnahal. He is president and CEO of University Hospital in Newark. Doctor, thanks so much for joining us as this news breaks this afternoon. So let's get started. What do you make of the FDA's decision, and do you think this was the right call?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that it was a productive exchange, I think, from the top scientific minds today about these questions. And this is a really complex topic. They were considering data from real-world epidemiologic investigations, but also clinical trial data. And I think they came to a productive conclusion around boosters being recommended for those age 65 and up. That is the group that's consistently showing more vulnerability to the virus over time, where immunity probably wanes faster and more significantly than for the general population. And the group that's most likely to be hospitalized and have a bad outcome with COVID-19 to begin with, but also have a bad outcome despite being vaccinated more than 6 months prior. And so I think that was the right move. I do think there needs to be further consideration of boosters for everybody else based on some of the data we've seen around the healthcare workforce. We're seeing more breakthrough infections across all ages of our healthcare workforce here at University Hospital, and a lot of convincing data on that across the country as well. So interesting conclusions today, and it was a really robust discussion.
As we mentioned earlier, the FDA, they say data from researchers in Israel may not be applicable to how the experience could play out here in the United States. Can you explain to our viewers what that research found?
Well, the research out of Israel was interesting because it was essentially a one vaccine strategy. They used the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine for the entire population. They really did prioritize the elderly and immunocompromised with the first 2 shots. And they really tried to, their public health agency tried to follow this very closely over time. And so as they parsed the data, as they divided it by age and other issues, they did see what I just described, which is mostly in older folks, that risk of getting infected and that risk of getting hospitalized higher for that particular group. And so we already know that that's happening now in Israel as a result. And I think a lot of the confusion has been people taking that data and saying, well, does that mean we need to do this for the general population? And what the advisory committee said, well, no, if you look at that data very closely, the vulnerability really seems to be among older people who have weaker immune systems at baseline.
Let me ask you something. What happens from here at this point? We know the CDC is having its own meeting about all this.
Well, the CDC advisory committee is also going to be taking a look at this separately. And so I think it's easy to get confused about all these different advisory panels. The one on FDA is really centered on whether the FDA should approve something that is based on a panel of experts. The FDA as an agency does not have to follow the guidance of that advisory committee. In fact, it doesn't to a certain percentage of the time for other drugs that are up for approval. The CDC advisory committee is really focused on how to apply that clinically. So should this be approved or authorized? How should clinicians be using this based on our expertise? And so the CDC will get that advice. And then the two agencies are going to talk to each other and figure out what the next step is. Remember that these are advisory committee decisions, but they're not agency decisions that become policy. That actually happens within the government as a separate step that follows.
Dr. Shereef Elnahal, a lot of information. Like you said, it is quite complicated, but we do appreciate your insights on this. We appreciate you joining us.
My pleasure.